You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper. So that was your plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah.
Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave. I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk.
Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me.
Remember that. All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
As a result of my actions, my elite husband. My name is Helen. 30 years old. I own a restaurant. People say it's impressive to be an owner at this young age, but the place was originally my father's, and I just took over. The chef, who's been with us since my father's time, is the one who actually cooks in the kitchen, preserving the flavors that have been cherished since its establishment. With the help of such longtime staff, I've somehow managed to keep the restaurant running. I'm still in the learning process. I took over the restaurant at the age of 22, right after graduating from college. Instead of getting a job, I was immediately entrusted with it from my father. I graduated from the economics department, so I thought I had learned a lot, but reality doesn't always follow the textbooks. Despite numerous failures, and my fair share of bad days, I've managed to keep the restaurant going to this day. I thought I was pretty lucky. About 5 years after I took over the restaurant, a man started coming regularly. It was Brian, who would later become my husband. Once, a group of men in suits came over. Brian was one of them. He said that he liked the food, and started coming as a regular customer. Brian and his colleagues were employees of a major food manufacturer, and they said they were visiting various restaurants for research.
I've had my eye on this restaurant for a while, but I usually go to the bigger ones in town, or in the suburbs, so I always pass this place by.
Oh, I understand. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. As I said that, Brian laughed sheepishly. I remember thinking he seemed honest and rather nice. My restaurant is indeed in such an odd location. But the taste is so good that many people have fallen in love with it and have been coming back for decades.
It's delicious, I've become quite the fan.
Brian confessed. True to his word, Brian became a regular customer and started talking a lot with me, the owner. Brian graduated from a top university and worked at a renowned company. He was the epitome of an elite. I had never been close to someone like that before. Not only was Brian brilliant at what he did, but he also had good looks. He was tall and slender with a well-defined face. Undoubtedly, he was the type who would be popular. Brian was 7 years older than me, so he was 34 at the time. I assumed he was married due to his age, but he laughed and said he was single. I've been living a life of work, and more work, and before I know it, I'm at this age. How silly of me. His easygoing manner, humorous conversation, and gentle tone made it seem like he wasn't an elite. Before I knew it, I had fallen for Brian. It was probably unrequited love. In his eyes, I was just the restaurant owner, and he was a regular patron. But then, out of the blue, he proposed to me.
Helen, would you consider being in a relationship with me, with marriage in mind?
I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding. Could such a wonderful person really have feelings for me? It felt like a dream. Like Prince Charming had come for me. I felt like the protagonist of a fairy tale, and intoxicated by that dream, I accepted. A year later, I married Brian. But this fairy tale didn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. After we got married, the next chapter of the story turned into something much darker, like a picture book painted over completely in black.
Hey, you're my wife now. You understand what that means, right?
Brian said this soon after we started living together as a married couple.
Yes, we got married, so I'm your wife now.
I could only respond with confusion to his sudden change in tone. Then Brian suddenly raised his voice.
What kind of a response is that? I'm your husband, so you should address me with more respect. A wife should respect and honor her husband. Don't you even know that?
I was too shocked to respond right away. What had happened? It was as if the Brian I knew had been replaced by someone else. A transformation from a prince to a tyrant. I wondered what kind of a witch had cast such a spell.
Listen, I'm an elite, you know that, right? You have to become a wife worthy of me. Prepare yourself for the training I'm going to give you.
From that day on, I was constantly ordered around by Brian. First, Brian demanded perfect housekeeping from me.
Make sure the house is immaculate, ready for anyone to come over at any time. That's a housewife's job. Don't you dare embarrass me.
My family ran a restaurant, so honestly, our house was never in a pristine state. My father was busy in the kitchen, and my mother was helping out too. There was no way we could manage perfect housekeeping. My parents did their best, tidying up and cleaning whenever they spotted a mess, but running a restaurant while raising me was overwhelming. My grandparents on my father's side lived far away, but my grandparents on my mother's side looked after me during particularly busy hours. That was how we managed to get by.
I can't do that. I mean, I have my restaurant to take care of. Don't make excuses before even trying. You don't even want to make any effort.
I managed to put the conversation to rest at the time by saying that I would try, but when I actually started, I realized that it was impossible.
Look, I have the restaurant to handle, so can't we hire someone for the housework?
It wasn't like I was saying I wouldn't do any housework at all. I just wanted to hire a housekeeper to make up for what I couldn't manage, but Brian didn't like the idea.
Why should we waste money like that? The best thing about a housewife is that she's free labor.
I was shocked by his words. Free labor, is that how Brian saw me? It became crystal clear at that moment.
That little restaurant of yours, who knows when it'll go under? You're lucky you found someone like me to support you. Be grateful and serve me well.
When we were dating, he had praised me for taking over the business from my parents at such a young age. That's one of the reasons why I fell for Brian. It might be a small place, but it meant a lot to me, and he had once praised my dedication to keeping it going.
Just keep the restaurant as insurance. If need be, we can sell it. It's worth something even if it's small. But if it starts losing money, shut it down immediately. It's not worth keeping if it's running at a loss.
That's what he said.
So that's what you've wanted all along. I'll never let go of that restaurant, no matter what. Just do your best, but don't forget that I'm only allowing this to be your little hobby because I feel sorry for you. Remember, it's because I care about you.
Brian said while laughing. From that day on, I started thinking about getting a divorce. But I still had some affection for Brian. I wanted to prove him wrong and make him apologize. I was sure he would understand someday. I worked like a horse with these mixed feelings. Indeed, it's a small restaurant, sustained mostly by regulars. Nowadays, most people opt for chain restaurants which offer the same taste wherever you go. That's why big chains thrive. But there will always be those who seek a nostalgic taste. That's why I want to keep the restaurant going. That desire never fades. While maintaining a seemingly peaceful marriage on the surface, I worked hard for the day I would prove Brian wrong. And to that, Brian half mockingly, half amusedly would say,
"Wow, you're really trying hard, still keeping that restaurant going, huh? I thought it would fail soon." Well, as long as you take care of the house, you can keep going.
I was already doing it without being told. Every morning, I'd wake up early to prepare breakfast for Brian, wake him up, and see him off, then rush out of the house. I'd spend a busy day at the restaurant, and then after closing, I'd shop for groceries, come back home to cook dinner, and clean. When Brian returned, I'd serve him dinner, get ready for a shower, do the laundry, prepare for the next day, and take care of anything else left to do. I was cutting back on sleep, scheduling every day tightly to manage everything without wasting a moment.
If the house ever gets messy, I'll make you close down the restaurant immediately and sell it.
Brian was probably waiting for that day. I could feel it. Perhaps he married me intending to have a housewife with assets who provides housekeeping services for free. Back then, I was infatuated with Brian. He knew that and thought I'd never stand up to him. That's probably why he chose me.
It surprised me how much you dedicate yourself to the restaurant. I thought once we got married, you'd only have eyes for me.
I feel betrayed, Brian said one day. I thought I was the one being betrayed. I had believed he understood me when he chose me. I wanted to say that, but I swallowed my words. And then things got worse.
My mother has fractured a bone and is hospitalized. Sarah?
Brian's parents live in the neighboring state. I don't want to say this, but like Brian's true colors, they are not the most pleasant people.
Brian is our pride and joy. A graduate from a top university, working at a leading company, an elite man. You've been chosen by Brian, so you should be grateful and serve us well. Helen doesn't realize her luck. Someone married to our son, Brian, should be greeting us in a fancy cocktail dress and a bottle of decent wine.
That's right.
It's just as I expected. A daughter of a restaurant owner must be poorly educated.
That was the first thing they said to me when we met. Not only were they rude to me, but they insulted my parents too. I was about to say something back when my anger got the better of me, but Brian intervened to settle the matter, so I decided to keep my mouth shut for the moment.
Come now, Helen is still young. It's understandable that she lacks in certain areas. Think of it as having a potential to grow.
I should have realized the true nature of this family at that point, but back then, I was convinced that Brian was protecting me and that he was on my side. After that, my in-laws continued to make snide remarks every time something happened.
I can't believe Brian married a restaurant owner's daughter. Right, someone like Brian could have married a daughter of a CEO or an executive.
Think about that, Helen.
Be a good daughter-in-law to us.
My in-laws seemed to think that only those working in big corporations like Brian were successful, and anyone in other professions, especially the service industry, were second-class citizens. But even so, Sarah's injury is unfortunate. I'd have to at least pay her a visit. But then Brian said something shocking. It's a femur fracture. She'll need hospitalization and rehabilitation for a while after surgery. Can you look after her?
Wait, but aren't hospitals still enforcing visitation restrictions? I can maybe visit or bring something, but looking after her might not be allowed, right?
Who said anything about the hospital? I mean, after my mother is discharged and comes to live with us. It took me a moment to understand what he meant. As I was silently pondering, Brian dropped the bombshell. Don't be dense. Once my mother is discharged, she's moving in with us, along with my father.
What?
You have a problem with that? Of course, it was a problem. Even the thought of living alone with Brian was unbearable, let alone with his parents too.
I can't take care of Sarah,
I said firmly.
I have my restaurant to run.
It's impossible.
Professional care would be best for her. Why should we pay for that when you're here? Then, close down the restaurant. Sell it and use that money for the family.
Brian made an outrageous demand.
I won't sell the restaurant. And I won't take care of Sarah. You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper.
So that was the plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah. Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave, I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk.
Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me. Remember that.
All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
Brian didn't hear it clearly and asked again, but I didn't bother repeating myself.
I need to get things ready, so I can't do it right now. Fine, there's still time before my mother is discharged. They say she needs at least a month in the hospital. If you're ready by then, that's fine.
Brian must have thought I had agreed and went to the bedroom, satisfied. I had been preparing for this for 2 years. Everything had been for this very moment. But even so, I still had hope. That Brian would return to the man he was before we got married. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved so much, that those happy days, were a lie. That's what I thought. But all my hopes were shattered. I had to make up my mind. I was ready. Hello, it's Helen. No, it didn't work out. It can't be helped. Let's take action. I made a call to someone, ready to move forward. A month later, an article made it to the front page of the economics section of the newspaper. The story was that the food manufacturer for which Brian worked for was about to be acquired by a restaurant group in a large stock buyout.
What the hell is this?
In frustration, Brian yanked the newspaper from side to side, tearing it in half.
This is a joke. We're a leading company. And now they're selling us out to some stupid restaurant group.
Brian crumpled the torn newspaper and hurled it against the wall.
Damn it, what's gonna happen? This can't be true.
Brian turned on the TV as if waking from a nightmare, only to see the same news. It seemed the acquisition was real.
Damn it, how did it come to this?
Brian slumped down on the sofa and ruffled his hair in frustration.
There's nothing we can do about what's already happened. Here, take this.
What's this? Brian looked at what I offered him and his eyes widened in shock. He seemed very surprised.
What is this?
It's a divorce petition.
I can see that. What the heck do you think you're doing giving me this?
Brian crumpled the divorce papers and threw them too.
That too, after the newspaper? No matter how much you crumple it, nothing will go back to how it was. Why do you want a divorce? I demand an explanation.
Are you kidding? Have you forgotten? You're the one who mentioned it. Brian went silent, likely remembering his own words.
I won't take care of Sarah or live with your parents. If you don't like it, get a divorce. Those were your words, right? I did say that. But well, I was bluffing, thinking you wouldn't listen to me otherwise.
So it was a threat. Brian didn't respond.
I married you because I loved you. I trusted you. But you deceived me and betrayed me repeatedly. That's why I've decided to get a divorce.
I took another divorce petition from the file and placed it in front of Brian.
I have spare copies, so feel free to crumple that too. If I run out, I can get more or download it and print it out. We live in such convenient times.
Brian stared at the divorce petition placed before him again.
This is a lie, right?
He looked at me with pleading eyes. No, it's true. This is reality.
You're not that kind of woman, right? You wouldn't do something so cruel when I'm so vulnerable.
It seemed like he wasn't going to accept it so easily.
Think about what you've done, and what you've tried to do to me. Which do you think is worse?
I took my time to tell Brian.
Do you remember what you said after we got married? That a wife should respect and honor her husband?
Brian didn't respond.
I respected you even before we got married. That's why I decided to marry you. But after hearing those words, my respect for you vanished. People who trample on others are also trampling on their own feelings.
Brian looked down, silent.
You saw me only as free labor, a housekeeper. And the restaurant I cherished, you saw as an asset to cash in. I realize that, but still, I loved you. Helen.
Brian looked up at me with hope.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize you cared about me so much. That's why I acted harshly. Please forgive me.
Brian held my hand, tears streaming down his face.
I'll change, I promise. Give me another chance. I'll treasure you this time.
I'm sorry. I pulled my hand away from Brian's.
Why not? We loved each other, didn't we? We can still make it work.
No, it's too late. I've lost all faith in you.
That's why I decided to acquire your company. What?
Brian looked at me, bewildered.
The big restaurant group that acquired your company, with 1,900 full-time employees, I'm the president of that company.
Unfortunately, I'm letting you go.
No, this isn't the time for jokes. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?
Brian half laughed, but it was the truth.
Never mind that for now.
Here, take this. Brian took the envelope I handed him with confusion, then screamed in disbelief as he checked the contents.
What's this?
It was evidence of Brian's affairs. There were documents from a private investigator and numerous photos.
A female employee in the secretarial department, a subordinate's wife, a recent college graduate, a woman from a business partner, a girl from a club, and who else?
The list was astonishingly long. Brian is attractive. And with his elite status, it's no surprise women flocked to him.
Amazing, isn't it? Your affairs are too many to count on both hands. I'll be seeking compensation for all of them, from you and the women involved. Hey!
What? Brian, looking at the documents and photos, turned pale and trembled. He tried to speak to me but didn't seem to know what to say.
The problem is the time and place of the affairs. A lot of them seem to happen when you were supposed to be working. I think this is a breach of trust against the company.
A lot of them occurred when he was out of the office on business during working hours, making sales rounds, on business trips, and entertaining clients. Brian was with his mistresses instead, as detailed in the documents.
You've been investigating me like this all along?
Yes, that's right.
That's not fair.
Brian threw the documents and photos at me.
You used the money I earned for this? No, not a single dollar of your money was used. Liar. You don't have that kind of money.
Brian, being an elite, had a high salary. He saw me as free housekeeping labor, but he did contribute financially to the household.
You know I'm the owner of a restaurant, right? Yeah, that near bankrupt one. Just a hobby, isn't it? Owner, huh? Ridiculous. It's true that if you look at the finances alone, the restaurant doesn't seem that prosperous. But there's more to it.
I told Brian the whole truth.
That restaurant was for gathering information. I was researching the current trends, what sells, and things like that.
That restaurant, established by my parents, was the first of many. Now, it's a major chain with locations not just in America, but abroad too. The company that acquired Brian's workplace was the parent company of that restaurant chain.
This must be a lie.
It is not a lie. The location of the original restaurant was ideal for market research. The first restaurant thrived mainly due to my father's skills. But the reason we could expand was due to understanding customer preferences.
You never talked about your family business like this before. You tricked me.
I didn't trick you. I just didn't tell you. When I started dating Brian and considering marriage, my father advised me to wait and see.
In hindsight, my father saw through your true nature. He said to tell you if you didn't change after our marriage.
Back then, I would have married Brian regardless of his opposition. That's why my father had said such a thing. And what I told Brian when we married wasn't a lie. My father was ill and struggling to continue working. So, he had my uncle take his place as the company president, and he pretty much retired. That's why it was true when I said I took over the restaurant, because my father was sick. He had undergone major surgery and difficult treatments. As an only child, I was still too young to take over the company, so I was in charge of the restaurant, partly so that I could learn new things. My business degree couldn't make up for my extreme lack of experience. I was told that if I failed to run the restaurant, I wouldn't be acknowledged as the successor. So, I worked hard to continue my father's legacy and earn his approval. My father probably warned me to keep quiet, fearing the business might be taken over or ruined by a bad marriage. But I thought Brian was different, and I wanted to prove I could be honest with him. That's why I remained silent. Well, I was disappointed.
My father even told me that if Brian wasn't the man I thought, I should resolve it by myself.
Of course, that's what I should do. There was no way I could run such a large corporation if I couldn't handle something as small as this.
So, I've lived these past 2 years thinking about how I would make you regret it if you didn't show any remorse. Though, at the same time, I hoped you'd change your ways.
I sighed, picked up my mobile phone, and made a call. The person on the other end answered right away, so I just said what I needed to and hung up. Immediately, the bell to the front entrance rang, so I unlocked it to let the visitor in.
Who's that?
Just watch. Soon the doorbell rang, and I invited the guest in.
The company president.
It was the former president of the company Brian worked for, soon to be mine. The former president bowed stiffly to me. Please proceed. The former president silently handed Brian a document.
Termination notice.
It was an official document. Brian was being fired for misconduct, including meeting women during work hours and charging personal expenses as business entertainment. In exchange for firing Brian, I promised the former president that he could continue as the company's president, and he agreed to the condition.
Even minor misdeeds can accumulate into a major offense. What you did constitutes a serious breach of trust. It's only fair that you're dismissed.
Brian stood in shock, but I had no intention of letting him off the hook.
If you understand, would you please leave now? Why should I? This is my house.
This place is rented, right?
The landlord says you can't stay here anymore. He doesn't want to rent it to you.
Brian looked completely confused. I decided to elaborate further.
I bought this apartment. And you seem to have forgotten, but the lease was only until last month. So, you no longer have the right to live here. I don't plan on renewing the contract.
Brian was speechless.
We'll have to decide on asset division and who gets which furniture, but for now, I don't want to see your face. Could you go back to your parents' house? Sarah is about to be discharged from the hospital, isn't she?
Sarah was scheduled to be discharged in a few days after a month-long stay in the hospital.
Go back and prepare for Sarah's return. We'll communicate through our attorneys about what comes next.
Please take him with you. I handed Brian over to the former company president.
If you come back, I'll report you for trespassing. Even though we're not officially divorced yet, if the landlord says no, it's a no.
Brian left the room with the former company president silently. There was still more work to be done, but I have reached the end of a chapter. After Brian went back home, I started receiving calls persistently from my in-laws, having heard about the divorce.
Helen, you're so amazing. Why didn't you tell us? You truly are our son's wife. We are so proud of you.
Getting a divorce must be a joke, right? Helen, you loved Brian so much. Can't you forgive a fling or two? That's just men being men. At first, they were arrogant, but when they realized my resolve to get a divorce was firm, they resorted to threats.
You got Brian fired. What are you going to do about that? We'll demand compensation. What you did is unthinkable for our son's wife. Hiring a detective to investigate your husband's behavior. Imagine how it would affect your reputation if it gets out.
When I confidently told them to go ahead with claiming compensation and leaking information about me, they finally shifted to begging.
Helen, I'm really sorry. It felt like you took Brian away from me, and I acted spitefully. Please understand. What are we supposed to do if you leave us? I apologize if I upset you. So, please forgive Brian. If you can't forgive him, how about just us? We were family once, after all.
Of course, I refused everything they had said to me.
I've said it over and over again, but I'm divorcing Brian. If you keep pestering me, I'll report you to the police and consider taking legal action.
After consulting with my attorney, we sent them a formal warning, and they finally stopped contacting me. I made sure Brian paid the compensation. And I ensured it was paid from the assets we divided. Luckily, his high salary meant he had savings. Now jobless and without savings, he's back living with his parents. He found a job in the service industry that he once looked down upon, working from early morning till late at night. Considering he had affairs with other men's wives, he's also facing compensation claims from their husbands. I hope he works hard and pays it all off, no matter how many years it takes. I talked to the women with whom he had cheated. All of them apologized, saying they weren't serious and were just in it for Brian's money and elite status. While I had anticipated this, any relationship with a married person, regardless of the reason, is a legal offense and can be subject to a lawsuit. I made sure these women understood the severity of their actions by legally requiring them to pay compensation. Hopefully, this will be a lesson and they won't repeat the same mistake. After that, I officially took over as the company president from my uncle. I appointed my uncle as the chairman to continue receiving his help and advice. Although my father's condition has stabilized, he's not in a state to work. But seeing me take over the company, he started seeing to bring him peace, and his spirits noticeably improved. Occasionally, he still offers his thoughts and advice, which I value greatly. I hope my parents live as long as possible. Right now, that's my greatest wish. I've caused them so much worry by getting involved with such an awful man. I gave my parents a lot of trouble, but I resolved my problems all on my own. That seemed to make my father approve of me as a manager. Next time, I want to meet someone better and reassure my parents as a daughter, but I'm not sure I want to get married for a while. This company is like my child now. I want to raise it and help it grow bigger and better. As a company president, I'm just taking my first steps. But I believe a bright future lies ahead on this path. And of course, I'm still running that restaurant. This restaurant was where my parents began their business, and it was the start of my career. In a way, it's like my first child that I shall cherish for the rest of my life. I want to treasure it forever so that I never forget where I came from.